pleased to introduce our speaker, Lyn Hill. Welcome, Lyn. It's a pleasure to have you join us today.
Thank you. So, hello, everybody, and thank you for coming today. I'm going to share some of my travel experiences, and I hope that they'll inspire you to plan your own adventures. I was connected to Life University by Rhodes Scholar, and I'll talk about Rhodes Scholar offerings today, but I'll also discuss many other travel options. When my children were young and the family traveled together, we considered the children's needs more than our own, and much of the pleasure in traveling was derived from sharing the children's excitement and happiness. Our travel planning, it revolved around what we could afford and what the children would enjoy. Before the children were born and after they aged out of traveling with mom and dad, planning for and then traveling with my husband often created tension. We aspired to different styles of travel. My husband loved spontaneity and adventure. He enjoyed the journey as much as the destination and loved traveling with as many types of transportation as possible. I was uncomfortable if every detail of our transportation and accommodations was not carefully arranged in advance. Sometimes we had entirely different ideas of the places we'd like to visit. Compromise was not always easy, but it often resulted in wonderful vacations. I agreed to go camping because we got a very big tent and had padded cots to sleep on, and we pitched the tent in camping grounds with hot water showers. On our first trip to Europe, I wanted to go to the theater in London and visit ancient theater ruins in Italy. My husband was determined to spend time in Greece with the ancient ruins in Athens and traveling to the Greek islands. In the end, a travel agent planned a wonderful trip that started with 2 weeks in England, followed by a hovercraft ride to France, followed by a train ride through Switzerland to Italy, where we had a few days in Venice and then in Rome. And then there was an overnight ferry from Brindisi, Italy, to Patras in Greece, and a bus to Athens, where we stayed for 3 weeks, interrupted by a tour of the Peloponnese and a brief cruise to several nearby islands before we flew home, and it turned out to be a wonderful trip. And that trip suggested a solution to our issues. Let someone else control the itinerary. My stepson has lived in Japan since he graduated from college. Several times my husband and I visited him and his growing family, and partially because it was difficult to travel without guidance in Japan, we let Harry plan our trip through the country. We stayed with Harry's family much of the time, and when we traveled, we were often with the family. But sometimes we ventured out sightseeing with 1 or 2 grandchildren, our built-in translators. Once we spent a week at a Club Med in Japan. Another time we spent a week in Thailand, touring in a small bus with guides that Harry hired. Aside from the airline reservations to and from Japan, we didn't have to make any decisions. One summer, when my stepson brought his family to the US, we let him plan a family trip, including both my other children and grandchildren, to Yellowstone National Park. It was the first time any of us had been to Yellowstone, and we all enjoyed the natural beauty and being together. In the late 90s, my husband and I discovered ocean cruising. My sister and her husband planned an Alaska cruise, and they suggested that we join them. I resisted at first. I thought there'd be too much food. I'd gain 5 pounds. There would be noisy teenagers and young people, or just too many people, and we'd have to dress up for formal dinners every night. Why would I want to go on a cruise? My sister finally persuaded us to go, and we had a wonderful time. There were lots of people on the ship, but we found a small group of friends. There were wonderful food choices, including a delicious spa menu, and I lost 2 pounds. The cruise we'd chosen had mostly mature adults, and they were not noisy. And while we enjoyed dressing up some evenings, was no formal dress code. That's even more true now. Most cruises are much less formal than even 10 or 20 years ago. And here's what I hadn't anticipated and loved. Cruises combine many of the advantages of a luxury resort and a sightseeing tour. At sea, there are games, lectures, live shows, films, concerts, fitness and spa facilities, casinos, something for everyone. And my husband and I could make our own choices of what to do, together or apart, or even choose to relax and do nothing. Once in port, we'd pre-chosen excursions to places of interest in the various cities we visited. No arguing about the itinerary. Best of all, we unpacked only once, and then instead of taking ground transportation to the various destinations, it felt like they came to us. After we learned that we enjoyed cruising, we decided to take a Baltic Sea cruise. We discovered that, except for Berlin and St. Petersburg, where it would have been difficult to get around efficiently by ourselves in a relatively short time, we did not need to go on excursions to sightsee. The ports in Scandinavia were located in the centers of the cities, with convenient public transportation, and an expert lecturer on board the ship showed us how to get to places of interest we'd chosen. Afterwards, my husband wrote, "This was an unusually satisfying trip. We saw so much, but we didn't come home tired. We felt relaxed nearly all the time, and were almost always in agreement about our priorities and what we wanted to do in the various ports. Lyn even states that she lost weight. She certainly worked out every day at the fitness center. The problem with all cruises, of course, is that you miss doing anything in depth. It's a survey course, but what a wonderful survey." The next year, we went on an Eastern Mediterranean cruise. It included a trip to the spectacular pyramids and the Sphinx in Egypt, as well as a day in Jerusalem. Sometimes there are surprises and bargains to be had. In 2005, we'd made no vacation plans. In the middle of the summer, I was surfing the internet to see whether there were any cruises that still had availability. All our previous cruises had been on Holland American, which has a passenger demographic that skews a little older, with people generally more interested in sightseeing than shopping and eating. I saw a Cunard cruise offered on the Queen Elizabeth II, leaving in just 2 weeks. They were offering a big discount for the most inexpensive staterooms. I called to find out whether this discount might also extend to the second least most expensive tier, and was offered more than a 75% discount on one of the most expensive staterooms. I wasn't sure if this was on the level, but eventually was convinced it was real and booked the Norwegian Fjords cruise. Our stateroom was huge. The closet was the size of the staterooms on our previous cruises. Apparently, someone had canceled last minute, and the company was eager to fill the stateroom. After getting over a touch of imposter syndrome, we thoroughly enjoyed this cruise, which, despite the title, started in Scotland and ended in the Netherlands. And the small cities in Norway had many other interesting things to see besides the fjords. The next year, I thought I'd try another last-minute booking again and see what great bargain was to be had. There was none to be had, and very few openings available on cruises. We chose another Mediterranean cruise to mostly different ports from the one we'd seen before. This was on the Celebrity line, and it was my least favorite cruise line. In the pre-port lectures, the emphasis was on where to shop, not what to see. Still, we enjoyed seeing the sights in the various ports. In Naples, when we got a little confused, a kind gentleman approached and offered to guide us around the city. He ended up spending hours showing us around. What a lovely, unexpected experience. After my husband passed away, I took several trips with my children and their growing families. One summer, we rented a house on Long Island. Traveling with family meant that there were always people around me, and I had lots of time to be with grandchildren and enjoy new experiences through them. There was no need for me to plan anything. The kids made the arrangements. The trip embodied the concept of togetherness. Another time, we all met in St. George, Utah, where my stepson has some business interests. In addition to being together with our expanding family, I enjoyed the natural wonders of the area, the nearby national parks, and the opportunity to learn about Mormon history. The following summer, my children arranged to rent a castle in the south of France for a couple of weeks. One of my granddaughters was playing in a basketball tournament nearby. We had some wonderful times together, visiting a cheese factory, shopping at the local markets, and then cooking with delicious fresh ingredients. We didn't meet many friendly or helpful French people, but we learned that you couldn't get a bad meal in France. But by the end of our time in the castle, I longed to have some time alone and to be in places that might not be so child friendly. I said goodbye to my family at the airport in Paris and then spent a couple of days there on my own. I walked through the different neighborhoods and visited Notre Dame, the Eiffel Tower, and the Monet Museum. Then I boarded the Eurostar and traveled by train to London. When we reached London, I took the Underground to a station near my hotel and then walked with my wheeled suitcase to the hotel. I'd carefully planned my itinerary for the next several days. I'd bought tickets to several plays in advance, and I visited the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Tate Modern, and the Churchill War Rooms. I shopped in Fortnum and Mason's and at Selfridge's. Everything went exactly as I'd planned. But when I got home, I realized that something was missing. I had not shared the experiences with anyone. I began to look for travel experiences that would bring me together with other people. There are many very good travel companies that offer tours of sites throughout the United States and all over the world. The different companies provide choices with variations in price, the areas traveled, types of accommodations, hotels, meals, transportation, types of excursions and guides, level of activity, age range of participants, participant demographics, and what's included in the price. Booking a tour through one of them takes much of the stress out of traveling. Hotels and most meals are included, and often air transportation is also either included or can be arranged through the company. There are other people on the tour, and it's possible to find companions and to make friends with whom to share the experience. Road Scholar is unique because it has a mission that emphasizes learning and because it is a nonprofit organization. Because of the educational mission, whether you choose a trip that's based on a single location or one that involves travel from place to place, there are guides and instructors who are experts in their fields, often several different ones in the same trip. And there is a group leader who may be one of these experts, but who is also dedicated to making sure all aspects of the trip run smoothly, to solving any problems or health issues that may arise, and to make sure that everyone on the trip feels comfortable and included. Because it is a nonprofit organization, Road Scholar is able to offer prices that are lower than comparable trips offered by commercial travel companies. There are travel experiences directed around numerous interests, with a variety of learning adventures on an extraordinary range of topics and interests, including history and culture, health and wellness, literature, homes and gardens, bridge and other games, walking, hiking, military history, cycling, food and wine, crafts, and much more. Right now, small group adventures and outdoor learning, especially in the national parks, are very popular. There are a few opportunities to provide volunteer service as part of a group. Travel costs for these trips may even be tax deductible. My first Road Scholar trip was one of these service learning trips. A small group of us prepared a restoration village near the Delaware Water Gap for the summer season, opening, cleaning, and sprucing up the various houses and stores in the village. We were there for the opening day when school children came to visit the site, and we got into costumes to act as historic interpreters, explaining what the children were seeing. A few years later, I went with Rhodes Scholar to the famed Chautauqua Institution. Chautauqua offers numerous public events in the areas of music, the arts, religion, recreation, and the pursuit of knowledge each day during the summer months. But our Rhodes Scholar group had special daily lectures led by experienced and knowledgeable Foreign Service officers and academics on the subject of Israeli-Arab relations. It was an immersive learning experience in a very special setting and a trip where I made a lifelong friend. I traveled solo on all of my adult Rhodes Scholar trips and was perfectly comfortable finding companionship in the group, even though most people traveled with a spouse or a friend. But now there are some Rhodes Scholar trips specifically designated for solo travelers, and also some trips for women only. A few years later, I took a trip to New Mexico. The educational focus was on the conversos and crypto Jews who settled in New Mexico in the 16th and 17th centuries, and whose descendants still live in Albuquerque and Santa Fe. We heard from rabbis, academics, and a man who had recently discovered that he had Jewish heritage. We also learned about the indigenous people in this region and visited one of their villages. And we had a couple of days when we enjoyed the art scene in Santa Fe. I should mention that at every Rhodes Scholar trip is rated for activity level, so you can know in advance whether lots of walking or walking on uneven terrain is involved and can choose trips that are right for the level of activity you prefer. This trip did not involve a great deal of walking except in museums and in the indigenous village where there were lots of steps. I think the most thrilling trip I took with Rhodes Scholar was the one to Cuba in 2015. Obama was president, and the restrictions on travel to Cuba had recently been lifted. The people were optimistic and very happy to see American tourists. Our American group leader, who was with us from the airport in New York City until our return, told us to be prepared for last-minute changes in the itinerary. The hospitality industry in Cuba was not yet fully mature, and we did have some last-minute changes in accommodations. We had a friendly and enthusiastic Cuban guide and expert lectures on the history, politics, religion, and culture of Cuba. We saw professional concerts as well as youth musical shows, dancers, and gymnasts. We viewed art, architecture, ruins, markets, and classic cars. We even visited the Buena Vista Social Club and a synagogue in Havana. What a wonderful trip, and an enlightening one, too. By the way, we had listening devices on this trip. They're pretty standard for Rhodes Scholar adventures that involve touring, and they're really helpful if you tend to be towards the rear of your group or if you might stray from it from time to time. Along with the trips I took with Rhodes Scholar on my own, I discovered their wonderful program of grandparent adventures that take place all over the U.S. and throughout the world. I've gone on 7 of them with 2 of my grandchildren. There are also family programs for 3 generations. You can choose programs based on the location, shared interest, or age range, which starts at age 5 and goes up through the teenage years. My first grandparent trip was with my oldest Brooklyn grandchild, Leo, who was 7 at the time. We traveled to Dunsmuir, California for a trip that was based on the Boxcar Children series of children's books. The program featured lots of nature and conservation activities, as well as lots of playtime, and also some reading and writing based on the Boxcar books. The program was located in a motel that had been made over from a train, and Leo loved sleeping in a converted boxcar. I loved the fact that it included a private bathroom. Since we flew to San Francisco, we spent several days there before joining our Rhodes Scholar group, and Leo was able to experience Fisherman's Wharf, a cable car, and a cruise around Alcatraz. The following summer, we traveled to Corning, New York, where we visited the Glass Museum and had the opportunity to blow glass, went to a restoration village where Leo tried his hand at blacksmithing, and practiced several other 19th century crafts, hiked down Watkins Glen Gorge, and visited an aviation museum where there was a hands-on lesson in making and flying model airplanes. The grandparent trips are often led by experienced teachers who are natives of or familiar with the locations in which the programs take place. Leo and I proved very compatible travel companions. The following year, we traveled to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. Pigeon Forge is the home of Dollywood, and we spent a day there. We also saw country music shows, learned about country music, and a little about magic, and toured Smoky Mountain National Park. As was the case in almost all of the grandparent trips, there was a pool in our hotel, and the kids hung out there after dinner each evening, while the grandparents sat around the pool, watching them splash around, playing in the pool. Playing in the pool really helped the kids to bond with each other during the short time we were together. I think our trip to Minneapolis was my favorite of the grandparent trips, probably because the activities were so closely aligned with my own interests. We learned about and learned to play percussion instruments, went to museums, developed special recipes and baked cookies, saw a show at the Guthrie Theater, played theater games, made books and prints, and learned to paint scenery. And of course, there was the nightly pool swim. Leo was the only boy on this trip, and he was just old enough to enjoy the girls' unmerciful teasing. My last Rhodes Scholar trip with Leo was a tour of Montreal and Quebec. In Montreal, we had a city tour and admired the architectural features and some spectacular murals. One night, we had a tour of the Cité Memoire projections, brief films projected on the exterior walls of buildings. Leo learned that he liked French food when we sampled it at the market, and I had my first ride on a Ferris wheel, Montreal's La Grande Roulette. While we were in Montreal, Leo developed symptoms of Lyme disease, so we also got to sample the Canadian healthcare system. Efficient, but not especially compassionate. In Quebec, we had a walking tour of the old city and took a funicular to Montmorency Falls Park. We saw the changing of the guard at the Citadel and a First Nation exhibit at the Musée de Civilisation. And we tried two typical Quebecan foods, poutine and a beaver's tail. The following year, we couldn't find a Rhodes Scholar grandparent trip that fit into Leo's busy summer schedule, and then I discovered that Tauk, an upscale touring company with a fine reputation, had bridge tours, trips geared for grandparents and grandchildren or for families. I booked an alpine adventure trip that took us to Lucerne, St. Moritz, Étal, and finally Munich. We experienced the longest summer toboggan run in the world and Area 47, a huge water park. We saw receding glaciers, a ski jump exhibition, a Bronze Age restoration village, and we visited a brewery where Leo got to taste non-alcoholic beer. It was a thrilling trip, but different in tone from Rhodes Scholar. Although we were taken to see local sites of interest, the emphasis was not on learning, it was on sports and physical activities. But we both enjoyed eating lots of chocolate and cheese. After the pandemic, when Leo had aged out of grandparent trips, his younger brother Wolf expressed an interest, if he could choose the trip. Wolf has a passion for science, so we went to St. Louis, where the St. Louis Science Center and the Challenger Learning Centers are located. There, we learned about and constructed rockets, got to fly drones, and participated in a simulated space mission. We also visited the Lewis and Clark Museum and the St. Louis Arch. Wolf enjoyed the activities and the other kids so much that he asked if we could go again next summer, days before we returned home. The next summer, Wolf and I went to Hutchinson, Kansas, site of the Cosmosphere, where most of the activities took place. We built model rockets, which were later launched, and did several exercises toward astronaut training. There was also flight training, and Wolfie was especially thrilled that he was able to fly a single-engine plane for a half hour with a licensed pilot beside him. The trip's climax came with a simulated space mission, and I'm pleased to let you know that we all arrived safely back on Earth after completing our mission. As I was preparing this presentation, I suddenly realized that many of my trips are relatively short, usually a long weekend or less than a week, and are centered around people, not places. But a side benefit is that they take me to some wonderful places and beautiful sights. I love visiting my aunt in Seattle, an exciting city where I also have several cousins. I have several relatives in various cities in Southern California, and I also have cousins in Minnesota where there's lots to do and see, and they've always made me feel welcome. A friend who retired to Florida has invited me to visit her several times. Who knew there were interesting museums in West Palm Beach and so many interesting places to shop? Most of us have friends with summer or country houses, or friends who've relocated and may invite us for a stay. These trips are by nature less structured and can be fun and relaxing. I encourage you to reach out to and consider visiting friends and relatives that you enjoy being with. Just don't plan to outstay your welcome. 3 to 5 days is probably a maximum in most cases, although when I was lucky enough to be invited by friends to visit them in their apartment in Nice, in France, I did stay longer. Years ago, we did not think of flying across the country for a wedding or a bar mitzvah or a friend or relative's special birthday. Now we can plan to celebrate with friends and relatives in far-flung places. And destination weddings, with events around the actual ceremony, are frequently spread over 3 or 4 days. Often they incorporate opportunities to explore the local sites, culture, and food. These kinds of trips usually involve staying at a designated hotel with many other guests who are there to celebrate the same event. A special interest can also generate the reason for a short trip. Last year, I went to Philadelphia for a genealogical conference, and I frequently travel to a retreat center in New Jersey where bi-yearly quilt retreats are held. I get lots of quilting done, but also enjoy the beautiful setting where the center is located. Think about whether your special interest might involve a conference, a convention, a course, or a retreat. The one part of travel I never look forward to is the air travel. Limitations on luggage and lost luggage, flight delays and cancellations, missed connections are all dreaded consequences of flying. But this form of transportation is almost impossible to avoid if long-distance travel is involved. However, for shorter distances, there is train travel, which can be relaxing and often faster and more efficient than flying. As a New Yorker, I've enjoyed short trips to Philadelphia with a friend to see the New Year's Day parade and visit museums, to Washington, D.C., where I traveled with grandson Leo to visit potential colleges, and to Boston with some family members to visit historic sites. I highly recommend that you consider train travel from where you live. There may be lots of interesting places easily accessible by train, and the train ride itself is an opportunity to experience sightseeing along the way. When I retired several years ago, I decided to treat myself to a river cruise along the Danube. River cruises have one of the advantages of ocean cruises. You unpack only once but visit many different places. In other ways, they are quite different. The most obvious difference is that they are much smaller. An ocean cruise may accommodate thousands of passengers. A river cruise has only about 100 or at most 150. River cruise ships are more like hotels than resorts. They may have a small fitness center, a pool, a walking track, and indoor and outdoor lounge areas, but there are few organized onboard activities. Sometimes there may be a musician or a dance party in the lounge after dinner, but there are no Broadway-level shows. There are fewer excursions offered in the various ports. On the other hand, They are mostly included in the price of the cruise. River cruise dining offers excellent meals, but there are no afternoon or late evening buffets. And dining is relatively informal, no assigned seating at all, as I discovered on my first river cruise. I chose to go solo, assuming that I'd be assigned to a table and that my table mates would become shipboard companions. I was unprepared on the first night when the maitre d' let me know that I could sit anywhere. That meant I had to choose between sitting at an empty table and hoping other people would join me, or joining a table already full of people who seemed to know each other. I quickly learned that almost no one takes a river cruise alone. But I did eventually find friends on board, and a group of 5, 2 women who were traveling together and a married couple and I, sat together at almost every meal and joined each other for many of the excursions. You have all probably heard of the Viking Cruise Line because of their many TV commercials. I chose to take my cruise on an AMA cruise ship because a friend recommended it as having a reputation that was a cut above Viking. I have no idea whether that's true. The ships and itineraries are very similar. But AMA offers a limited number of single rooms without a single supplement. I believe that Viking does not. The last time I inquired, I was told that I'd have to pay for a double room, essentially double the fare. The Danube cruise was lovely. We started in Budapest and went down the river to Vienna, several smaller Austrian cities, Český Krumlov in the Czech Republic, and then Passau in southern Germany. The cruise ended in Munich, which was convenient for me since I have family there, and was able to stay a few extra days before flying home. There were many castles and cathedrals along the way, but also concerts, folk dance demonstrations, and lots of good food. In the summer of 2020, I planned a summer trip with my trusty grandson companion Leo. As had been the case in the previous year, there was not a Rhodes Scholar trip that fit Leo's busy schedule, but we'd had a good experience with Tauk Bridges the year before, and there was a Tauk River cruise along the Rhine that looked very appealing. Of course, you know what happened to travel in the summer of 2020. COVID closed it down. The following summer, vaccines were plentiful and travel experiences were available again. There wasn't a Rhodes Scholar or Tauk Bridges tour that fit our schedule, but I discovered an AMA river cruise down the Rhine that was available at the right time. Leo had spent the winter in Munich with other grandparents because in-person school was available there, but he was home in time for summer camp and would be back from camp in time to go on the cruise with me. He understood that there might not be any other kids on the boat, but thought that would be okay. 2 weeks before we were to leave, AMA issued a new regulation, one that would be no one would be permitted on board unless they had had 2 vaccinations at least 2 weeks earlier. Because Leo had been out of the US, he got his first vaccination just before going to camp. He was scheduled for the next one when he came home, but he would be 5 days short of meeting the 2-week rule. The company was unwilling to make any exceptions, so once again, our cruise on the Rhine was canceled. In 2022, we decided to try again. We scheduled our trip and flew to Amsterdam, where the ship was anchored. We boarded that afternoon. In the evening, the passengers were gathered to hear good news and bad news. The bad news was that the recent drought had made it impossible to navigate down the Rhine. The good news was that the itinerary had been thoroughly revised. We would now cruise through the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, ending the trip as originally planned in Basel, so that return flight plans would not need to be changed. Neither Leo nor I had ever been to any of these countries before, so we were happy with the change. And the better news was that in consideration of the sudden change, AMA would provide every passenger with a voucher for a 75% discount on any future AMA cruise. Leo and I thoroughly enjoyed seeing the beautiful little villages and robust cities, churches, museums of all types. A high point was the chocolate making workshop in Brussels, Of course, there was lots of chocolate to be eaten on this trip. A special bonus for me, I had a companion on a river cruise, and Leo did not mind being the only teen. He's the kind of kid who talks easily to adults, and we had no trouble making friends who were happy to join us for meals. I'd expected 3 times to be the charm on my Rhine River cruise, but it took a fourth try to finally do it. Leo was no longer available as a travel companion, and my other grandchildren were all too young for a river cruise. And I wanted to be sure that I had a travel companion. I learned that AMA was willing to let me transfer Leo's 75% cruise voucher and offered it to my good friend Susan. I'd done a short trip to Philadelphia with her a few years earlier and knew we'd be compatible travel companions. We each took a private stateroom and enjoyed each other's company and the many lovely sights along the Rhine River. Susan was new to river cruising and thrilled, and a little surprised at how much she enjoyed it. It was fun for me to share the experience with her. Before ending, I'd like to include 2 tips that might be helpful for travel. Always plan to arrive at least a day early if you're traveling to the starting location of a tour or a cruise. That way, if your flight is delayed or canceled, you still have a good chance to get there in time. The extra hotel bill will be well worth it. And in choosing photos to illustrate this talk, I was struck by the number of landscape and interior photos that I had compared to a much smaller number of photos of my travel companions and myself in those settings. Photos of places of interest are easily available on the internet. When I remember the trips I've taken, I'm really much more interested in seeing photos of myself in the various places I've been and of the people with whom I've been together. I'm going to keep this in mind for future trips, so I suggest you take fewer photos of places alone and more of people in those places. That will also give you more time to appreciate what you're seeing as opposed to focusing on what your camera is seeing. A word about Real ID, which is now needed when you fly within the US. If you have a passport, you, of course, needed to travel outside of the US. You can also use it as Real ID when you are traveling in the States. But you probably want to have a Real ID card, usually a driver's license, learner's permit, or non-driver ID. You can get this at the DMV. For several years now, the DMV in New York has been offering enhanced ID when renewal of licenses came up. An enhanced ID serves the same purpose. A Real ID has a star on the upper right corner. An enhanced ID has an American flag. Global entry cards and other trusted traveler cards can also serve as Real ID. I'm thinking about a short trip to visit my cousins in Minnesota this summer, but I'm very excited about the next big trip I've planned, a 12-day cruise on the Queen Mary 2. I've persuaded my friend Susan to come with me again. This will be the first ocean cruise I've taken in nearly 20 years. I have such happy memories of the trip my husband and I took on Cunard's Queen Elizabeth II, and I'm very much hoping the Queen Mary will be as enjoyable. But what truly appealed to me about this trip, which will visit 5 Caribbean islands, is the fact that it starts and ends in Brooklyn. There will be no air travel, no worries about luggage, canceled flights, or delays, just an Uber to the dock in Red Hook, and then 12 days later, another Uber back to my home. I've never been to the Caribbean, so this is going to be an exciting adventure, and I'm really looking forward to it. These are the travel companies and cruise lines that I've personally used and that I've mentioned. There are certainly many others that may provide equally wonderful experiences. Friends have praised Overseas Travel, OAT, for tours that cater to over 55 travelers, and Lindblad National Geographic Cruises. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
My question is, You mentioned other uh, real ID uh, options. Can you tell us how those are made available?
Okay, so other options besides the real ID, one is a passport, which you get through normal passport channels, and I think you can now apply for a passport online. um, a global entry card, which also includes TSA pre-check, and that costs a certain amount of money, but it lasts for 5 years, and it also helps you when you're re-entering this country from a foreign country to move more smoothly through customs. Um, then there is the enhanced ID. The enhanced ID has all of the advantages of the real ID, but it also serves as a substitute for a passport if you're traveling to Canada or Mexico. So those are and then I think there are some other trusted traveler cards besides the global entry card, which also serve as real ID. The real ID, as I said, has a star on the upper right, and the enhanced ID has a little image of an American flag, either on the upper right or the lower right.
I was intrigued to hear about river cruises. Um, Now you say that there's no buffet, you don't stop as long in ports of entry. What
So
are like so
you may stop in ports of entry just as
hmm
long as with ocean cruises. Um, but there are fewer excursions offered. There may be only 3 or 4 different options. Usually one that involves bicycling, and then, 1 or 2 others. One that may be a hike through um, a wilderness area or a park or something like that, and one that may be a tour of a castle or a cathedral. But they're free. They come with the trip. The excursions on an ocean cruise, there would be many more. There's maybe 6 or 7 at a port, and they all cost a certain amount of money depending on what the excursion is.
Carlton has a question. Do you suggest to join a group or organization who travels often or seek traveling alone and build an organic base of friends?
I think that's really a personal decision. If you if you have a group of friends who travel together and you enjoy being with them, by all means, travel with them. On the other hand, their schedule might not mesh with yours. But it's also true that some people enjoy the adventure and the serendipity of meeting new people. Uh, I guess the downside of that is there's a possibility that you might not meet somebody that you really enjoy being with. But I think, if it's a group of people who are already united in the fact that they are interested in traveling to a specific place, um, with a group that has a specific emphasis, likely you will find somebody or many people who share your interests and who you enjoy being with, and that's a fun way to make new friends.
Yeah, I had made some friends on the Rhodes Scholar tours. I've been on 2 Rhodes Scholar. I like I like that tour company a lot. They're nonprofit, they're educational. I took mostly the sightseeing, not the athletic ones, but there was a lot of walking, and they make accommodations for people who can't walk. You know, you could sit in the, welcome area, and we'll come and pick you up. Um, I I think we exchanged email addresses and things of that nature, but I haven't really been in touch with anyone since the travel. It was just nice to have companions to eat lunch with and
Yeah,
you
I mean,
know,
I have
or
found
dinner.
on the 11 Rhodes Scholar trips that I've been on, 4 by myself and 7 with grandchildren, we've
Hmm.
always exchanged email addresses at the end and phone numbers. Only one person that I've stayed friendly with. Um, you always think that you're going to be getting together again, but uh, once you're back home and you kind of back into your own routine, uh, very often it doesn't happen. But it doesn't matter because you've had a nice time with a group and you've shared the experience with them.
I don't know if you're on social media, but Carlton asks, as much as traveling seems exciting, I feel like in the social media space, the traveling experience seems to be a popularity contest just to get likes and followers.
I'm not on social media, so for me, that's not what it's about at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think uh, for those that are traveling that I've seen on social media, if they help me to discover a place or to learn more about a place, then it makes it worth it to follow them or like their post, I find. Yeah. And then that was interesting what you said about the advice to if you're going to be on a tour or a cruise, arrive at the place where the cruise is going to leave from or the tour is going to begin a day early because the airlines, especially what's going on now, I think I'm definitely going to take that advice to heart.
I had an experience once. One of the trips one of the grandparent trips that I was taking with Leo, the one to Minnesota, we actually had planned to arrive 3 days early because we were going to stay with my cousins in Minnesota before starting the trip. As we were in the taxi on the way to the airport, I got a text from the airline saying that the plane had been delayed. And then a few minutes later, I got a text from the airline saying that the plane had been canceled. And then we actually got to the airport and had the taxi turn around and bring us back home because then I got another text from them rescheduling us, but they rescheduled us. It was, I think, a Friday that we were leaving. They rescheduled us for a flight on Monday, and we not only would have missed any time with my relatives, we would have not even been in time for the program to start. We got home and I got on the phone with the airline and tried to figure out how we could possibly get out and get to Minnesota earlier than 3 days from then. And what we finally found was a flight from Baltimore to Minnesota with a stop in North Carolina that was leaving the next day. We then got up, I think at 7 in the morning, the next morning, and took an Amtrak train to Baltimore. In the Baltimore train station, there was a transfer bus to the airport. We then spent some time at the airport until our flight left, and it went to North Carolina and then to Minnesota, and we got there at the end of the day. So we ended up with, I guess, a day and a half with my cousins, but we were at the program on time. But you can see what can happen. Um, I mean, most of the delays and cancellations that I've had have actually happened on the other end. So I got home later, which is usually less of a problem. But But that one was really a stark example about why it's important to try to arrive early.
Yeah, so in those critical times where you need to be somewhere and the flight's canceled, well, one alternative is to see if they'll let you, if the airline will allow you to leave from a different city that
Right.
they serve.
Yeah. And I think,
Um,
if they've canceled the flight, they very likely will do that.
yeah. Uh, Carlton asks, is doing research important before going to a destination, or is just showing up more exciting?
I think again, that's a personal preference. Whether you, if you do research, then you may find things that would be of particular interest to you, um, and then you're able to um, make sure that you don't miss them when you get there. On the other hand, if you have a good tour guide, and you're on a good tour, you certainly don't need to do a lot of research ahead of time.
You can even you can even conduct your own research while you're at the
Yeah,
destination
right.
because uh, one of my itineraries was after this, you know, trip scuba diving to, this particular island. When we came back, we would have several hours on our own to, enjoy whatever we wanted or rest. And so I did a little research. I was in on Maui and I noticed that there was a chocolate factory tour where not only did they grow their own cacao uh, and other crops, uh, but made the chocolate then and there. And so I went on the chocolate tour, and they had a tasting at the end, and it was very pleasant. I also got very sunburned walking to that. So, well, if you're going to the Caribbean, the tropics, Hawaii, any of these sunny,
Take
beautiful
sunscreen,
places,
take lots of.
yeah, always wear sunscreen. Carlton mentioned that I know you missed your husband. Do you think about what he would have enjoyed as you continued your traveling journeys?
Yes, sometimes I do. I kind of avoid going to places that we went to together, um, or that we plan to go to together. There's lots of other places to go. Um, and of course, there's some places that I go and I go with the kids, or um, that his spirit might be with us. But I don't find that I'm sad during travels.
Carlton asks, is there a particular goal you would like to achieve as a traveler, or are you a freelancer?
I think I'm basically a freelancer. I don't have a bucket list.
Yeah,
For instance, this trip that I'm planning to take in November, the Queen Mary trip, uh, I'm interested in seeing the Caribbean islands, which I've never been to. But honestly, the fact that it's an ocean cruise that I don't have to take, or a plane to or from, is what's most appealing to me.
thank you so much, Lynn. It was really great to hear about your experience, and it was so varied, so full of tips and advice. I really got a lot out of it, and I hope you in the audience also enjoyed it as well. Carlton says thank you for this webinar, and thank you for sharing your experiences with us.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I enjoyed doing it.
Oh.